other thing we're asking for is guaranteed cost of living adjustments annually. They had been giving us 3-4% for maybe the last 10 years, which is fantastic. And this last year, they decided to do away with it.
We have on the line right now on the Zoom, we have fellows from the National Institute of Health who have just unionized with the United Auto Workers Union. We have Ian, Fucci, and Emilya Ventriglia. Emilya, Ian, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Absolutely. Glad to have you, and thanks for your flexibility. Had obviously a lot of folks wanting to talk about the tentative agreement with the letter carriers. But so the y'all being able to unionize in and of itself was a win, because y'all are what's called fellows. You're officially not quote-unquote employees, according to the National Institute of Health. And I actually have some recent experience with this. I talked about, during today's show, how I'm a federal employee. And I have been a federal, what's probably more accurate is that I have been for the last 7 years a federal employee. I worked at the Corps of Engineers and I was an AFGE member, still am an AFGE member, but I am recently a fellow, like you, with the Department of Energy doing workforce development with the building trades unions and stuff like that. Really exciting, and one day I'm going to dive into some of the work that I'm doing on my job on the radio. But that position is officially not, like, I'm officially not an employee. I'm an educational fellow. And so can you talk to us first through, like, I want to learn about why you organized, but before we talk about kind of some of the conditions that you were wanting to fight at the National Institute of Health, just how were you able to get the ability to unionize, even though you are quote unquote like not employees, you are fellows? How were you able to swing that?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So I guess I'll start just by saying what fellows do at the NIH. So, like, what is a fellow? And so we're biomedical scientists. We do research that relates to public health. We are at the bench. We do experiments. We write papers. We develop drugs, cancer treatments, and vaccines. For instance, I look at how anti-cancer drugs interact with their targets. And Emilya, if you want to share what you do.
Yeah, I study the long-term effects of opioids on brain function.
Okay. Sounds like important work.
So to start, I mean, fellows actually make up the majority of the workforce at the NIH that's doing the science. So the people who are actually, pushing science forward, the people who are writing the papers, the people who are actually putting out the work are fellows, and we're not employees, or they call us trainees or something like that. There actually aren't that many permanent scientists or staff scientist roles. Many labs don't even have one. And so it's not like the federal employees are actually the ones who are doing the work. So yeah, like I said, even the clinical work is done by fellows. So we also have clinical fellows who work in the hospital at NIH. And so how were we able to unionize is we filed cards last June. So we filed 3,000 authorization cards. And yeah, if Emilya, you want to chime in on kind of the history of what happened since then.
Yeah, so you're completely right. They said NIH management appealed to the FLRA saying, we couldn't legally form. And we had been preparing for that type of response naturally, legally. But the first mode of, rectification for this we took was direct action. So within a couple of days, we got several hundred signatures of fellows from all across the NIH to an open letter to Javier Becerra, who is the head of HHS, so the umbrella agency that manages NIH. And it was basically like, we want to have a fair election. We want to form our union. And within about a week and a half after this public letter went out and was delivered, they removed their appeals. and stood out of the way, and we were allowed to start scheduling our election. When we had our election, we had a 97.8% vote yes, and there was actually so many people at the polls, they started turning them away. The FLRA couldn't handle the amount of people who wanted to vote.
Wow.
So yeah.
That's crazy. And so that's really cool that you were able to do that. And I may or may not be taking notes. We'll see. For the Department of Energy, that was a joke. Or maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But so why did you feel like you needed to unionize? You know, I've been a union member for a long time, the better part of a decade. I'm a leader in the Labor Council. I am like as committed to the labor movement as I feel like I can be. I think everybody should unionize, even if you have a great job. I think everybody should do it, but I also live in the real world, and I know that's not typically what happens. So what were some of the problems, if there were any, that you as fellows had at the NIH that you wanted to rectify through unionization and negotiating a contract, Emilya?
Yeah, so, we began with several different fellows who had come in from unionized universities. And the issues that are widely felt in those universities throughout all of higher ed and academia and really many workplaces are no different than here at the National Institutes of Health. Some of those include bullying, harassment, and discrimination. For gender-based discrimination and harassment, academia is second only to the military. And there's a lot of entrenchment of harassment within this, field. We need a fair pay, and especially because we're in these expensive major cities, especially like, the DC metro area, we need a living wage. And there needs to be more protections for international workers who make up a large proportion of the workforce at the NIH as well as other, universities. So these are issues that are felt not just here, but many workplaces. And so that's basically where we began.
Gotcha. Ian, were there any of those issues any other issues that she didn't talk about, or any of those issues that you feel like could benefit from digging into a little bit deeper?
Sure. So kind of the three pillars that Emilya highlighted were wages or salaries, bullying and harassment, and protections for visiting fellows. So really what we're asking for on wages is a living wage. Many of us, so the National Institutes of Health is based in Bethesda, Maryland, which has a very, very high cost of living. We're right near DC. And in fact, before we unionized, there were different pay scales for the exact same positions. So the NIH is made up of 27 individual institutes, and they're all paying people differently. So at the institute that I work at, which is the National Cancer Institute, we were paying folks about $10,000 more on average than other institutes. And so another thing that we really wanted to do was make sure that pay was fair across job titles. And actually, kind of in response to us forming the union, NIH has since moved on making the pay scales more equitable across different positions. So kind of another piece of information that we're using to ask for higher wages, livable wages, is that the NIH itself had done a study on the postdoc experience around the country. And one of the things that they had suggested is a starting salary of around $70,000. The NIH does not offer that. And so we've, of course, pushed for, well, you put your money where your mouth is. Let's get $70K as a starting salary for postdocs. And just for clarification, a postdoc is someone who has a PhD who's then continuing to do research after their PhD. So, and also 40% of fellows who live in the DMV area are actually below the MIT living wage for the area. So it selects for folks who are already affluent or folks who are already able to afford the living and not necessarily training a wide swath of folks from many different backgrounds.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And so you're asking for you're asking for a $70,000 minimum starting wage, and I think you said the current starting wage. Can you repeat that?
So currently, the starting wage for postdocs, I believe, is around 60,000.
Okay.
And for so we are actually a pretty large bargaining unit with 5,000 fellows. Postdocs make up one portion of that, and they're people who will hold PhDs, so the highest level of education in our bargaining unit. So postbacks, who are people who have a 4-year degree and come and do research for a few years, they make below the living wage in many cases. I think we're asking to really just bump them up to the living wage, which is around $55K. Currently, I believe they make around, but they definitely make less than 50. And graduate students who also make up some portion of folks at the NIH make less than the living wage as well. And these are not insignificant numbers. These are thousands of workers at the NIH.
Right. And so you've got kind of 3 sections of the workforce. You have postdocs, and you're wanting to push the salaries up for them from 60 to 70. Postbacks, which are 4-year degrees, you're wanting to push those up from, you said, something under 50 to 55. And then the grad workers who have like master's degrees, you're wanting to push them to, 55 as well, or 60?
I can answer that. So we're not really trying to ask for a significant bump for the grad students. I used to be a postbac, and now I'm a grad student. I have my bachelor's and my master's and 7 years of full-time experience, and I make $54,000 right now. And to be honest, I'm very worried about my lease ending and the rent going up, because there's no rent laws here in the suburbs where I live, which I have to live outside of the city because I can't afford to live in the town that our institute is at. And I'm not certain that I'm going to have housing after this year because the rent is so expensive, and I make, $54,000. So, another thing we're asking for is guaranteed cost of living adjustments annually. All other federal workers get this. We don't get this. It's not guaranteed. And just like this year, they had been giving us 3-4% roughly on average for maybe the last 10 years, which is fantastic. And this last year, they decided to do away with it. So we want some certainty that we can maintain our wages and not effectively take a pay cut every year, especially when all other federal workers are, receiving this.
Right. And that's really important. And, Emilya, these all sound like reasonable demands. You're not asking for your wages to double. You're not, this all sounds very reasonable. And so how is management responding at the bargaining table?
I mean, for this, they're basically saying they won't have a discussion whatsoever. They sent back a proposal for compensation with 100% of the language struck. And the only thing that they included really was that if a fellow is overpaid, they have 30 days to return the money. And they gave us another sweet little proposal in response that says they reserve the right to reduce our pay for any reason at any time.
Okay. Wow. That's crazy. Obviously
they kind of
No, yeah, go ahead.
They kind of dropped a bomb on us. So this past week was the last week that we had time scheduled to do bargaining. And so we're asking for more dates now. And on the second to last day of bargaining, when they're like, all right, well, let's finish up this contract, they said, actually, we can't bargain over anything that has to do with money. So they're just not moving at all.
So they're saying what? That it's, so for federal employees, when I worked at the Corps of Engineers, my salary was set by Congress. Is that the thing that they're saying? Is that they're saying because we're a federal entity, we can't bargain over wages?
I want to say that might be their argument. It's not very clear because we've asked them for their argument and they're not very forthcoming.
Because it doesn't make any sense because, I negotiated my wages as a fellow individually, right? Like this has got the thing that I'm a part of with with the DOE is like it's a kind of a small thing and it's like kind of an experiment. But like I negotiated my wages individually and I got them to increase the offer significantly from the first offer that they made, right? So like the idea that they're saying they can't, it's a legal thing, negotiate with you over wages, just on its face, especially if you have the right to unionize, like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. So
there's also
Emilya, go ahead.
Okay. So something I was going to say is, one, they sprung this on us next to last day of negotiation. So number one, you can't tell me that's not a tactic. That's not intentional, right? I don't think that's really in the best faith, right, possible. The other thing is, through these negotiations, we had fought so hard for another, central tenet of what, our issues were, which was bullying and harassment. Again, it's extremely pervasive. 1 in 4 people at the NIH say they've either witnessed or experienced harassment. Over half of those people refuse to report it because they don't think anything's going to improve or they think it's going to get worse, retaliation. And about half of the people who do report that it did get worse. When I was first joining the NIH, I was looking for different laboratories to join. And my favorite one that stood out to me so much, I, of course, Google the principal investigator, only to find that he was in the news recently for having inappropriate relations with his postdocs and, quid pro quo, doing these types of things. And he's also was the director of the National Institutes on Drug and Addiction. And I think the worst part of all this was not just that a individual of, intense power over, trainees of fellows was abusing his power, but that it was reported that several different, women trainees, if you will, were encouraged by management not to report. And, this happens all the time. And so we were fighting very hard to have a independent third-party appeals process and grievance procedure for any types of discrimination, harassment, and bullying. And they fought us and said, you're not employees, you don't count. You can't report to the EEO. And so they said all these legal things like, you can't have it. It's, our hands are tied. It doesn't have anything to do with us. And tell us why, a couple of days ago, we were actually able to sign a grievance procedure and protections for bullying, harassment, discrimination that's going to allow us to have, ideally third-party appeals process. So they've said these things before. And, why could they give us these raises any other time? And why can they lower them at any time at their discretion? So I think it's a commitment issue. I think they're just saying things. I frankly don't trust what they're saying.
Yeah, I think that would be my inclination as well. And so, Ian, y'all are not taking this lying down. What are some of the next steps as we wrap up this conversation? What are some of the next steps that the UAW is taking?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start by plugging that on Tuesday at 8 a.m., we're having an informational picket. We've had hundreds of folks sign pledge cards to come out and demand that NIH go back to the bargaining table and bargain over wages with us. We've made wins on lots of different areas, kind of the core tenets that we talked about, but they're refusing to even talk about wages. And that doesn't just include our salary either. They've made threats that our health insurance plan may not continue past the end of this year. And so we really, really want to get out there and say, hey, this is bullshit. Like, let's get back to the table. Let's iron this out and let's, protect fellows' health insurance for people who work at the National Institutes of Health.
Right. And are y'all having some sort of informational picket soon, or did I? Am I?
Yeah,
Tuesday morning. Great. All right, and so hopefully you'll get a good crowd out of that, and looking forward to seeing y'all win with the NIH. It's a really, really exciting campaign, I think, and I think the UAW is doing it in their newly, the kind of combative and militant way. So I'm looking forward to continuing to watch this campaign and continuing to update folks about y'all's contract negotiations. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for y'all's time. All right, folks. So again, that was a couple of fellows from the National Institute of Health, Emilya Ventriglia and Ian Fucci. The fellows at the National Institute of Health just unionized with the United Auto Workers. So really exciting campaign there.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.